Welcome to Sit and Stay, the podcast that breaks down the challenges of starting and maintaining a mental health practice into digestible chapters. Sit and Stay is presented by RipsyTech, an electronic health record company committed to addressing the mental health crisis in the United States.
Hello, and welcome back to the Sit and Stay podcast brought to you by RipsyTech. As always, you are joined by RipsyTech's product manager, Parker Anderson, that is myself, and RipsyTech's very own founder and CEO, Tom Tarshis. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Parker, nice to see you, sir.
Always good to see you too, Tom. So, as always, quick updates on RipsyTech before we get into today's topic. We created a super awesome How to Start Your Private Practice course. Please go check it out at ripsytech.com/practice. All right, let's dive into today's topic. Tom, you and I we've been chatting with more people lately who want to start their own business, start their own practice, and I think from that experience, we've come to realize that people who want to go into business together, there's a certain set of questions they ought to be asking themselves before they decide to go into business with, their friends, for example, or just anybody that you want to go into business with. So I'll pause there before I, ask anything specific. But what are your general thoughts about this?
Yeah, well, and Parker, it's I have my own personal experience where it's another one of these, hey, what have I learned over the years that I want to share so other people don't make certain mistakes or have problems come up. And that, part of our mission is to share that information. But yeah, Parker, we have the honor of helping a lot of new clinics get rolling. And invariably there are people that have an idea you've met clinically, or it's a friend you've had, and let's do something together. And a lot of the effort goes into what's the business going to be, what are we going to do, and often not enough thought or discussion goes into serious questions about ownership, direction of the clinic, disputes, and money. People change their behavior around money. Money and sex are the top two reasons for relationships failing, marriages failing. And so keeping all that in mind, and which is hard to do at the beginning because before you've made a dollar, or you're just trying to get a business to be successful, you're not maybe thinking about, long-term, what is everyone's plan, or that first disagreement that's going to come up because there's so many unexpected things. And I think with some of the recent communications we've had and talking to these potential new groups, I am trying to get people to have these hard conversations at the beginning to avoid any problems later on.
Yeah, and it's not, it's not an assumption that these people are like misaligned or anything. It's really just it's just really good advice for anybody kind of going into business. Like, make sure you have these conversations, be in alignment on these things ahead of time so you can kind of save yourself the headache and the heartache later if there's going to be headaches and heartaches.
Yeah, and it's not even, right, it's not even opening a mental health practice. And anyone opening any business, and here in Silicon Valley, we actually have people who have an idea for a good company, and they go make a pitch to venture capital, and all of a sudden they have a bunch of cash, and they've never even talked about what everyone's dream is with this company. And yeah, it's a bizarre thing, and almost certainly those situations there's going to be problems around them, but we gotta be mindful in our field as well.
Absolutely. So what would you say are some expectations that partners need to align on before opening a mental health practice?
Yeah, so I think, right, number one is deciding on actual ownership, right? So And part of this is a discussion around nonprofit or for profit,
Mm-hmm.
which if you do decide to go the nonprofit route, you take out some hard conversations because no one owns a nonprofit. The nonprofit will just continue, hopefully, when people retire. There are still conversations around bonuses or disputes or who's, every company has a board of directors. Then that board of directors hires the people who run the company, and sometimes they can be the same people, etc. So disputes can still happen, but for a lot of groups in mental health or helping profession, not taking a nonprofit path is reasonable. It and I think we've talked about this before, nonprofit versus for profit, and
Oh
there
yeah,
are
we
pros.
talked about it pretty recently.
So sort of the nonprofit aside, though, most people don't do a nonprofit. Like when a couple people get together, there is some extra work around that, and most people, depending on the laws of the state, there's going to be you might need to have one person who's the quote owner on paper, but regardless of the laws on how you need to incorporate as a business that's providing mental health services or medical services, the ownership structure can still be anything within that. So, lawyer, you can create a management services organization or other agreements with the bylaws that even if on paper Dr. Tarshis is the head of the professional corporation in California, the real ownership, you know, division is listed elsewhere. And so the main first, go ahead, Parker.
Yeah, no. When you say the main, the real ownership division is divided elsewhere, are you referring to like stock ownerships, or what is that exactly?
Yeah, or like, so, even so in California, for example, you need to have a clinician who is the 100% owner of the professional corporation that
Mm,
hires other clinicians. And that being said, uh, you know, putting nuanced legal case law or other things aside, that 100% ownership of the corporation can be an ownership that sort of has nothing associated with it. That pay out of profits, decision. It's essentially what do you do with the profits and who are the decision makers.
mm-hmm.
Even if you're the 100% owner on paper, you could have bylaws where that sort of doesn't matter at all, and just the bylaws answer the questions about who really has the ownership and what do we do with the profits.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
that is what people need to talk about from the beginning. So if you have four people going in together to get something started, regardless of the legalities around how they have to incorporate, which you don't even need to worry about at the beginning place, that you need to sit down and say, hey, is it 25% each? Or why, um, I'm just coming part time, so I want 10%. Or, hey, I'm a physician, so I want more. Whatever people are thinking, there needs to be a conversation and discussion around ownership.
Okay. So ownership is one thing, but what about actually running the practice, running the clinic? Because you could own the place and say, "Oh, I run this place," but who really runs the place? Who? How? Say that you have four people. Who's going to be in charge of operations? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, so you know, within the ownership, right? So the owners sort of decide on who is the board of directors for the company, and then the board of directors decide who runs the company. So are those initial four people going to be the initial board of directors? Are they going to bring in some other people to be on the right? That some companies just have people on the board to lend their expertise and knowledge.
Right.
And then there's what are the rules around voting someone off of the board of directors? Um, what are the rules around, hey, the board of directors has decided to, um, you know, put this person in charge, but then they're not doing a good job. And so the board wants to shake up the officers and who's the CEO and, who's doing different tasks. And when it's like four people starting a company together, usually they would be the board of directors, the initial people, and they people would sort of know, okay, I'm going to be the CEO, okay, I'm going to do operations, and those titles are you could make up whatever you want, but people sort of feel like they know what their roles might be. A
Yeah.
couple people might, I'm going to be head of clinical services, but that's what people need to decide at the beginning. And then the hard conversation piece within there is, what do we put in place if, hey, we're all great friends and we all feel like everyone's very competent, but what if someone starts making decisions that you don't expect and they're not good for patients or they're not good business decisions? What's going to go, how are people going to resolve that? And even though it seems like, oh, it's ridiculous, nothing could ever go, how could that happen? Like, that stuff does happen. And so if it's four people, is it if three out of four people, they can kick someone out of the company? And then what happens to their ownership shares? And
Yeah, well, those are all very big questions. Well, I was going to ask before we get into how do we decide the ownership shares if somebody leaves? The disagreements. How do you have, I don't know, recommendations for how to handle disagreements? Do you put it to a vote, or does somebody have ultimate deciding power? I mean, I guess it's to each their own, but that sounds like a conversation of, if that happened, this is how we should decide that gets decided, and deciding that before you even start the company. That's what it sounds like. But yeah, any like examples of?
yeah, right. And no, and if you're, there is a scenario, if you're a solo person, or if it's, say, it's just two of you starting a business, um, sometimes it's easier to sort of put in place that, hey, we're the people starting the business. We're going to maintain majority control between the two of us, and it's gonna, the votes and how we decide disagreements is going to come down to, you know who owns majority ownership of the company votes, and then that's how decisions are made. And on, if you start a company and you want to bring people in with ownership, but it's a lower percentage, then the fewer people who are maybe starting a company at the beginning, the easier it is, because instead of four people, the fewer numbers, the less people, the easier it is to come to agreements and consensus.
Right.
And yeah, so but if there's four or five people who all want to start a company and everyone knows each other, right, immediately from the beginning, this becomes a lot more, you know, very high on the bullet point list of items to discuss. That, like, yeah, hey, what are we going to do in disagreements? How are we going to handle things? And what if, right, if it comes down to, we want to kick someone out of the company, are people still allowed to keep the, right, you can keep your shares of a company and still be kicked out of a company. Is someone allowed to keep their shares and the share value? Lots of times, you can be fired from all your roles at a company, but people can't necessarily force you to sell your shares in a company.
Huh.
So is something going to be written in, though, in the bylaws, that if you are kicked out by a majority decision, that you have to sell your shares back to the company?
Oh, okay, so like that's possible. You can do that.
Anything is anything is possible is sort of the
As long as you
answer.
have a signature signed agreement saying that that's what will happen.
Yeah.
Okay. What about I mean, you mentioned like clinical services officer or like clinic directors. What are those roles and how might those be different from, the COO, for example?
Yeah, well, and they're for right board states are different, and let me not claim to be an expert out where I have experience, but um, right, every state will have rules on how many officers a company needs, like just on paper, and usually it's like you need a president, secretary, treasurer, vice president's optional. So usually one person can actually serve in all of the roles. But then that's sort of on paper, like who's running the corporation. And then there are the day to day, like real roles within a company. And those are distinct things.
Right.
Again, for like small businesses or people, something starting together, people are often doing multiple roles. Um, and so it's on some level, like who's going to do what within the clinic, like that is important to talk about ahead of time, but that's less likely to cause serious conflict over money or ownership or things like that. If there's a problem with some, like if someone turns out not to be skilled at being the clinical director or at, you know, the eight who's ever doing um, hiring, if they're not skilled at that, a lot of those situations are not as difficult to change. However, whenever something is happening with sort of the board of directors for a company or just the people who have the ownership shares, that is the intense uh, topic that's what can get very intense. And so it is this discussion that is someone going to have more ownership than other people at the beginning, and is that justified and why? And that's if four people are sitting down and someone says, oh, let's just all do 25% each.
Right.
If someone feels that's wrong because it was their idea or they're bringing more to the table or they're investing $50,000 and other people aren't, and they're like, no, that's not fair, I want 30% because of X, Y, and Z, that needs to immediately be the first thing discussed.
Okay, let's say there's four people and they all say, yeah, they all say, oh, we're all 25%. But then once things start really shaking out and things get going, one person is not doing as much as the others. What do you, then what?
Yeah, and then
It's like a group project.
yeah, right. It is like a classic group project. So is ownership, right? Is the ownership going to actually just be like whoever puts money in is going to be equivalent ownership? So people could sort of decide, yeah, we're going to do 25% each, and everyone's going to throw in $5,000 as, to get the business started. And that we're going to leave it as that, for that's how the ownership shares start. Then, if you get to that place where someone's not meeting expectations or not working out or high conflict, then you have to drop back to hopefully those conversations that you've had around that just has to do with maybe terminating or removing someone from the company. And then, if someone is removed from the company, there would be what happens to their ownership shares. And so the discussion is, okay, hey, say for some reason, and it's hard to even imagine at this state, but um, partner A needs to be kicked out of the company. What are we going to do about the shares that they have? Are they allowed to keep them? Usually not for like a small business startup, but in bigger companies, often people would. And so then it's no, people are forced to sell their shares back to the company. And then do you force in, at least what people paid or fair market value at the time they're kicked out of the company? You know,
What if four people go in and they're all working full time, and then one of them says, "You know what? I want to spend more time with my family. I'm going to work half time. I'm doing 20 hours a week." Then what?
yeah. So then again, it depends on what is tied to their, what did they promise at the beginning, and was it decided, okay, the ownership is going to be decided on everyone's coming to work full time doing the different things they do, and that's how you've earned your sort of ownership in the company. In
Mm.
which case, then you have a problem if quickly into it someone's like, "Hey, I just can't give the time that I promised." So yeah, so on one level, it's okay. That person is gonna sacrifice half of their shares of ownership because they're no longer working full time. That might be an agreement where, like, for the first 3 years of the company, ownership is just determined by, the hours people work, and then that definitely needs to shift or be different at a different point in the company.
So like it can adapt into kind of like, I devoted my whole career to this place, but I don't really like see patients anymore, but I still own part of it at some point.
Correct. And the sort of work for your shares is a common practice for a lot of companies. So, and
Gotcha.
we have the luxury in mental health clinics that our startup costs are not that high where you necessarily need huge investments. So
Right.
you people could sort of give a loan to the company instead, and hey, when you're working full time, you earn 500 shares a week, and that's how we're going to do ownership, until we get up to X shares for everyone, and then we're gonna, those shares will be granted, and then we're gonna shift to a different structure for ownership.
Okay, I want to talk about friends specifically. Um, because sometimes you might go into business with somebody that, you know them kind of well, but they're not like, a long-standing personal friend or something like that. But let's say you are going into business with somebody who's like a long-standing personal friend. Maybe your families really know each other. I don't know. Like let's just say this person is in your life for the long haul. um, are there kind of special, difficult conversations that those people need to be having?
Yeah, and and Parker, being mindful of some of the feedback from other podcasts and what's maybe hard to follow along with listening. I'm feeling that there are so many permutations around what to do with ownership and other options that, I think for the listener, it's maybe less around some of that, but actually, hey, what percent do you want to be working? What do you want to be doing in 5 years? Are you going to be having changes in your family that are not expected? Or are how many years do you want to work before retiring? On some level, it's less about how those are resolved or planned for, and more about you need to know more about the people that you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if we're super successful and in our second year we have $200,000 in profits, does that mean, do you want to take 50 grand for yourself because you own 25% of the company? Or are we going to agree, no, we're trying to help people, so that's all going to go to open a new clinic? And if that's the case, how many clinics are we going to try to open? If you're like Tom, like infinite number throughout the world. If you're no, if you're a more normal person, okay, we're going to try to get 4 clinics with this many people, and then so that's everyone's going to have a different idea there, and people may not even have thought about that. So that's what you need to get aligned on. And it fits into the friendship question because often we assume we know very well what's going on with their friends or their life, and but you don't really know. So it's almost, go to AI and say, what are 10 10 things that can destroy a friendship when you go into business with your best friend. And then look at those 10 things and say, oh, hey, we didn't talk about what to do with extra money. Or, yeah, hey, I know that you like to do the 4-week vacation every summer, but see what it says and push yourself to talk about the most difficult things. Like, hey, I know you stopped injecting heroin, but what if you relapse again? That.
All valid, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah, what a world we live in, that going to AI to figure out how to work things out in your personal relationships is actually pretty solid advice. I don't disagree with that advice. Well, that in
Yeah.
in the specific case that you mapped out. I don't know if I mean that like overall, but
AI is great for at least presenting many scenarios that should be talked about, right? And
yes, yes.
all too common is people get to know each other through their clinical work, and they say, oh, they take good care of patients. Oh, and we have the same sort of life values and goals. And then they jump to like starting a business, but they haven't talked about any of these businessy money, other aspects of ownership, and that's what creates problems. The secondary piece, Parker, just to throw in, is it's not for the ownership piece. It's not just the person going into the business; it's also their partner if they're married, because ownership rights 50-50.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. That's right. That's right.
So often you need to have, when you're giving ownership or shares in a company, you need to have the spouse sign as well. And often the spousal agreement, because what if your friend dies in a car crash? Then you're not dealing with the friend for their ownership, you're dealing with their estate. So often there's contracts about spousal agreement that if your partner who's in the company dies, you will need to sell your ownership back to the company at a fair price or something like that.
And is that only specifically if both partners are working for that company? Or is that like just a general thing for married people?
That's
Wait.
just that's just a general thing. So in my
Oh,
business dealings, my partner has had to sign agreements every time ownership is. So
wow. That's interesting. Good to know. I'm married. All right. So, I guess in the interest of spelling it out for the listener, do you have like a list that you like to refer to?
here's 7 bullet points to get started. Are you going to be for profit or nonprofit? If you're for profit, what's the business structure and ownership? How long are people planning to practice? Who will be on the board of directors for the business? Who will the clinic directors be? And just to throw, and then if you're for profit and a private equity group offers to buy part or all of the business, are people interested in that? And
Mm.
if you say I'm not interested, they're going to give $5 million to everyone. Then are people interested? And then finally, how will disputes among owners be addressed? That's my like. There are 100 more questions, but start with those 7, with your favorite alcoholic or mocktail beverage. That will get you rolling.
Right on. Good advice. All right. Anything else left to say on this topic before we move on?
No, I mean, I'd love to pull, and we'll see. We have some groups. Maybe we can pull them on as guests to see actually what
Oh,
they
discuss
did.
like what did you do? Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
great.
and that will be a good tie-in for this.
Now, a quick break with Rye, our AI mental health practice advisor.
This is Rye, your AI mental health practice advisor. Practice owners often ask, what's the one administrative task new practice owners underestimate the most? The administrative task most new practice owners underestimate is taxes. Without planning for them early, they create budgeting surprises that quickly destabilize a practice. For more practice advice, ask me a question at RipsyTech.com.
Okay, Tom. So we have about 5 minutes left. I know you said you wanted to make sure we save time for a mental health business moment. So let's hear it. I'm buckling up for a doozy. I hope.
Well, and
I hope to be satisfied.
I've talked about it before, and so that's why it's on my mind, and I more than once, I'm sure, but we have been struggling to get our business license in the city of Berkeley since we reopened our nonprofit there the beginning of 2024. And it stems from the building. The last use of the offices we're in was not as therapy offices. It was maybe a business office. And so the city was saying you have to do this drastic proposal, post yellow signs, remeasure the building. And I was like, this is ridiculous. We're trying to do that. You need help from the owners, though, because I don't have measurements for the building. You need floor structures. The owners are good people. Got down to the city office, like, I've worked on trying this. There was like thousands of dollars. But ultimately, even with trying to do things with the city, it was just stuck. Stuck. And it's a problem because we cannot get our Medi-Cal license and get our Medi-Cal credentialing until we have that city business license. So the mayor of the city of Berkeley has said she wanted to make it better to do business in Berkeley. And I heard or saw that. I'm like, all right, mayor, here. So I went to the mayor's website and I said, here, I've been frustrated. Here's what I'm struggling with. I sent a list of the businesses in the current office we're in, all doing therapy, same as us. And I'm like, you said you wanted to make it easier. This is nonsensical. The mayor's office, said that she was too busy, but they forwarded it to someone else to deal with it. And Parker, 4 days later, they said, you don't need to do this zoning change. You are okay. And they personally pushed it to get a zoning certificate to where now I don't actually have the license yet because I have to get the 2024 license and pay penalties on it. I'm like, I'll just pay I don't even want to try to get those waived. And then after we get it for the 2024, should be in line to get our license. And it will be a over 2 year saga, hopefully coming to a close to get that city business license. So
wow.
But it was a sort of one of these moments where you spend so long getting frustrated and then you just are shocked when you get a good outcome. And
email the mayor. Email them. Yeah, I'm going to email the mayor. I'm going to tell people that story. I think that's really cool.
She has earned my vote and maybe a basket of cookies or something.
That's awesome. All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and wrap things up right here. And this is a great spot to end. So thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Sit and Stay podcast brought to you by RipsyTech. If you have any questions or you're interested in being a guest on the show, send an email to sitandstay@ripsytech.com. And whatever platform you are listening to us on, please follow, subscribe, like, comment, review. Any of those things go a long way in helping out the show and getting it to other people such as yourself. All right. This was great, Tom. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Parker.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Sit and Stay podcast. Until we meet again, we invite you to sit and stay with the ideas and stories shared today. Dive deeper into how RipsyTech can support your practice by visiting us at RipsyTech.com.